Hello and welcome back to Building Wealth on the Go, a podcast by KLT Wealth Management. Today is October 11th, 2023. I'm your host, Brad Wilson, back here with my colleagues Courtney Beach and Joe Filiameni. Back after a long hiatus. This is episode 7 of our season 4 of our podcast. We took a little break through the summer, just passed through a nice Thanksgiving weekend, filled up on some turkey, some ham. Feeling good and ready for the week here.
Yeah.
Even though now we're already halfway through it, believe it or not, with those shortened holiday weeks. But, in the last few months since we have done the podcast, there's been lots going on, lots of news. As much as we like to say people go away in the summertime, lots transpired, lots of news was going on. So let's dive right into it with our first headline of what's making news right now. So we're going to talk first on inflation's jobs, CPI data. We've gotten lots of information lately, so I think it's important we kind of delve into that. And what does it really mean for everyone listening, watching, wherever they are right now? Sort of the big news. And I think the big one was inflation back up. It's going back up. So what does that mean, inflation back up to 4%?
Yeah, so I think that would definitely signal the central banks now in terms of moving forward with possibly some increases in interest rates. Again, their target is to reduce that rate of inflation, and we hit that 4% rate, and they don't like that. So maybe some of the things that they have done throughout the summer haven't worked through the system yet. And it may be sort of a temporary blip, but I think consensus is that interest rates need to go up slightly higher and stay higher for longer.
Because the central banks have been very cautious in what they say, and are always cautious, but they've been a little more cautious in the words they've chosen in the last few months. So it wouldn't be entirely unexpected for them to raise it. A quarter of a basis point. I don't think they'd raise it much more than that, but they've surprised us before, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see. The problem is that a lot of people are already hurting, so I don't know if a quarter basis point is, it could be a big blow for some people.
Yeah, I think they're at a bit of a tipping point now, and the problem being is there's a lot of factors that they can't control that are involved in inflation rising, right? Well, obviously mortgage costs are embedded in CPI data, and inflation that's significantly higher, the cost of borrowing. You've got oil prices, them raising the interest rates doesn't really affect oil prices. So there's lots of different factors in there. But one of the big things when we look at the economy and the state of it with sort of central banks is jobs data. And we just recently got the jobs data here last week, and it surged. It smashed expectations in the U.S. It was above expectations here in Canada, and so, we saw an immediate market reaction. We've seen a bit of a downturn the last few weeks, immediate market reaction to kind of rebound. People feeling the economy is a little bit stronger, but it's almost a bit of a false hope, I think, with the way the economy is, because it just means that we're in for a little bit of a prolonged period of difficulty and higher rates.
See, it makes me wonder, though, if this is sort of false advertising, because since COVID, a lot of jobs have come back from overseas, and they're reshoring, and my question is, how much of this is just reshoring and how of this is organic growth for organic growth purposes? Because just because Amazon or another companies don't have jobs in Taiwan or China and they're just putting them in North America doesn't mean there's more jobs worldwide. There's just more jobs in the States or in Canada. So
And I think under normal circumstances, we'd be happy with job growth, right?
For
like
sure.
in a normal, rising economy, growing economy, that we're happy with these types of numbers, but not when it's with a high inflation rate. So ultimately, we need some numbers to actually drop on the job market in order to bring that inflation down. So it's an unfortunate thing that we're looking for a downturn in order to bring this inflation in check.
And Bank of Canada has got themselves in this sticky situation because, like you said, Brad, it takes a long time for their moves to make any difference in the public. Like, if it goes up 0.25%, is that going to stop companies or you and I from spending right away? No, it's not. We still have to live our daily lives. We still have the things we want in life. It takes a while for that to trickle through. So raising it, like, have they already raised it enough? And it just hasn't hit people yet.
I think the big thing is you're looking at mortgage renewals, right? We're starting to get creep closer and closer, believe it or not, to 2024.
Yeah.
2024 renewals are going to be up. You're going to be renewing in the 5 to 6% range, most likely, especially at the first half of the year. They've already scaled back predictions on, a lot of people are anticipating lots of rate cuts next year. Now they're anticipating very few. Maybe we don't even see any at all. Who knows, right? It's really tough to gauge at this point in time. And I think that's where a lot of analysts have a difficult time predicting right now what way are they going to move, because they're, Joe, you mentioned kind of the balancing act they've got to do, that central bank, without sending us into a complete tailspin, right, downward. Then they've got to balance the sort of getting inflation down and mitigating these risk factors that are, potentially sending inflation back higher. Because we don't want to be in an inflation environment that's above 3% on a regular basis.
Yeah.
No.
The only people it's going to affect are the people who are actually renewing this coming year.
Correct. Yeah.
So there's still people who are holding on to their low interest rate mortgages who are breathing a sigh of relief or crossing their fingers and toes, hoping that
They're
things
happy
fix
they locked in for
by
5
the time
years.
they come around, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
And you're not seeing a ton of banks really pushing fixed rate mortgages right now either, because generally when banks start to push the fixed rate mortgages is when they anticipate rates getting cut, because they want you to lock in at those higher rates for a longer period of time instead of staying in those variable mortgages when the rates might go down and that variable rate will drop with it. So, that's also a telltale sign of when you think those big banking companies are, our big six here, that are they're forecasting some cuts, and it's not happening anytime soon. They're comfortable leaving the fixed rates at 0.5% to 1% below variable, and saying, "Oh, lock in if you want," but because they're not too concerned, right?
No.
And we should note, that 5 to 6% mortgage rate is not a terrible rate. I know it's not. You're not used to it at 2 or 3% that you currently have, but in normal terms, like a 5 or 6% interest rate is not a terrible rate of interest. Now, of course, couple that with a $800,000 mortgage, and then payments are going to go up.
Well, likewise, we're not used to the interest rates. We're not used to these house prices. We're also not used to this level of inflation, right? It's all uncharted territory for us right now to have all these sort of in going on at once, right? So definitely something important to watch sort of as we go forward. What's making news next? We've got the grocery debacle. This happened a little while ago. It's kind of fizzled out, but I think it's important to touch on because it has been a pain point for a lot of sort of political tensions domestically here. But grocery prices continue to be at the forefront of the inflation fight. And you've seen a lot of companies really pushing out big profits, Loblaws, Empire, who's the parent company of Sobeys and whatnot, and Farm Boy. So you've seen them with really big profits. They've met with, a lot of government officials. Where are we sort of heading with this kind of grocery standoff at this point of battle with consumers?
Well, we're about to find out because the grocery gurus were supposed to have a solution after Thanksgiving, and maybe even by the time this podcast goes out, we'll see what they have to say. But
it's
I don't know, if I'm a store owner, right? Like, how do I feel about all this?
If you're a small business store owner, you're gonna get hit the hardest by this. If they're
true. Like, if I'm already competing with the big stores, and all of a sudden the big stores are forced to drop their prices, but even as a big store owner or a shareholder in that big store, that you kind of look at. Why am my profits being questioned? But where in the food chain, literally in the food chain, that people are making money is the big question.
I have a feeling the ones that are going to hurt the most are the food producers, the ones who are producing the breads, producing the chicken wings, the ones
raising the chickens.
Yeah, those are the ones that are going to get crunched by because the big grocery stores go in and they have more negotiating power. So we'll see.
Yeah, so yeah, lots to kind of watch on with the grocery kind of standstill. We'll see what kind of comes of it, but it'll be an interesting sort of fallout in the next few months, and if that even has some impact on inflation, if prices do come down significantly from whatever solution they come up with. Next up, we've got some sort of geopolitical news. The first one, which sort of happened a little while ago, but Canada-India tensions rising, and I think we've even seen trickle effect of removing diplomats and whatnot in the last few weeks. But what sort of impacts are we seeing from this sort of Canadian-Indian tensions here?
I was really surprised that it actually got to this point, because I always felt Canada and India always had sort of a really good relationship in terms of immigration and sharing services and things like that and stuff. So when this kind of blew up, I was a bit surprised and stuff. But those tensions, dealing with India's got a lot of population over there, and there's a lot of immigration coming into North America from that area, so it might have some long-term implications.
So the final sort of topic, on sort of big news headlines is the Israel-Palestine, and more specifically Israel and the Hamas attack in Israel recently, which has just been kind of almost came out of nowhere.
It was a surprise.
And a big surprise, and it's caused just sort of complete terror over there right now, and this war is essentially broken out, and it's causing a lot of sort of, again, increasing global political tensions. And it's just, unfortunate some of the just super sad, the tragedies that are going on over there now.
It's almost as if everyone took everyone who didn't, knit at home, all these political leaders were plotting of, what wars do we want to start, or what tensions do we have, can we act upon them, because this is what the third war we've seen that I know of since COVID has smoothed out.
And it's not like Russia-Ukraine's done either,
right?
No, again, we kind of we talked about that significantly through COVID and whatnot, but then here we are, almost 2 years later or whatnot since that started. I think it was February 2021, and we're almost or February 2022, but we're almost 2 years past that, and it's just so there's so much going on, and then this obviously just came out of nowhere. Obviously, there has been lots of tensions between Israel and Palestine that
forever,
for a long time, and the kind of treatment and whatnot, and then so it's definitely. I mean, you see just some of the news coming out. It's just atrocious, sort of what's going on.
Yeah.
But,
I think what we're going to see is it's certainly going to impact the energy markets.
Yeah.
I think because that's a high intense sort of area focused on energy production, and now there's a disruption there, and so that's going to have worldwide effects.
Yeah, there's a chance that other countries that are oil producers are going to get involved in some way.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. It's tough, and I think we just continue with these sort of headlines. It's just showing you. I think we're at a time where there's just much more increased sort of risk internationally. The relations are not as strong as they used to be. There's more conflict. There's more war, and sort of to your point earlier, Courtney, about countries bringing jobs back home.
Yeah. Deglobalization.
Kind of signaling that. I'd feel a bit better if, our workers were domestic, right? Or, we're not exposing ourselves to risk of, different countries.
We're not as dependent on each other, which has, pros and cons. Like if something like COVID happens again, we're more prepared, but then this opens up geopolitical tensions more, because if you don't have to depend on your neighbor and you have an argument with them, you're less inclined to smooth it out or talk it out.
Yeah. So again, very fresh sort of with all of that. So we'll have to kind of see how that plays out. We'll see on the next podcast sort of where things have gone from there. Okay, so moving into housing, big topic of discussion. We kind of touched on mortgage rates and whatnot, but big news is CMHC about a month ago now came out with a big report and said we're about 3 million homes short, 3 to 4 million homes short in Canada. So, we're in a high interest rate environment, but there's lots of people without, places to live and people needing homes, right? So The supply factor is going to continue to be an issue for a long time until we get that. And it's not like we can build 3 million homes overnight.
No.
Yeah.
Right? So it's an issue. We talked about immigration. We've had very strong immigration, which is great for the growth and the prosperity of the country, especially when we do have sort of lower birth rates as well in Canada. Sort of that replacement rate. So you're getting to the age of the boomers, right? And whatnot are getting older and retiring and out of the labor force. So that immigration's great, but we also need a place to house people.
Yeah, well, I would be interested to see a statistic on how many houses are empty because they're Airbnbs or somebody doesn't live there permanently, and how many people actually own more than one home.
Yeah.
Because we have people who own multiple homes.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they're renting them out, maybe they're not, but you know that doesn't help the situation at all.
And I think you've seen, you know, some of the cities have imposed sort of that vacant unit taxes and whatnot. So like they're trying on that front. I don't think maybe it's only 1%. So somebody could just say, well, I'll just pay the 1%, and, you know, be on with it. But yeah, so we'll see how that sort of plays out. I don't think. You know, we're gonna, because of that big supply issue, that you'll see a major housing correction here.
No.
I think, you know, we've seen sort of prices dampen over the last little bit and whatnot, but you know, are we really going to see a big correction? I think as soon as, I don't know, my gut feeling is as soon as interest rates start to claw back, whether that's mid and next year or 2025, you're going to see people flock back towards the market because they're going to see opportunities. And so,
because the demand is there, right?
Exactly.
They're just sitting and waiting, and they're kind of watching to see what happens with interest rates, and they don't want to commit. But we have seen sort of just on a local level, we've seen, you know, a bit of softening of house sales. Houses have been, you know, listed for longer. We're seeing prices somewhat drop as well. Maybe not a lot of, you know, the bargaining that's happening that was happening earlier. So we're definitely seeing a different sense, even though there is still that big demand for housing.
And it takes a long time to build a subdivision. It's not something that's done overnight.
Cost of building
has gone up, supplies have gone up,
and so that's
labor.
Where the pricing's kind of, you know, wavered a bit. Like before, you could almost, it was a good deal to almost start a new build, but now the new builds might even have such a bigger premium on them than, you know, houses that are, you know, 10, 15, 20 years old, because, you know, the cost of building them is so high that they're not going to be able to have that price decrease. You probably won't see that in new builds as much as, you know, homes on the secondary market.
Even house flipping, you don't hear so much about people doing house flipping as you used to. It used to be a great industry like 5 years ago. You know, you could make a good buck put into hard work, but you're not hearing about that near as much as you were.
Well, and I think the government's cracked down a little bit on that as well. As if you're doing it and they deem it as a business, well, then it's a business for you. There's no capital gains, and that's business income for you. So I think that there's a lot of cracking down on the government.
I think, you know, one of the big things too is just with interest rates being so high that the people have been priced out from qualifying, right? It's not that people can't afford a mortgage payment. We've seen it, like they can afford the rent payment if it's similar, but and they may have saved for a long time for the down payment, but it's really just getting qualified because you're now having to qualify at almost 10%, right? So it's a lot harder, and you need a much higher income. And if you're an individual, you're not a couple purchasing a home, it makes it even more difficult, especially in some of the bigger cities like Toronto or Vancouver. It's virtually impossible.
For sure.
Yeah, and rent is so high that, you know, which one is better, you know, it's a toss-up.
Yeah, very difficult. So we'll see how sort of housing plays out in the next little bit. I did say that the housing developments did increase the last little bit. They were down in August, up in September, so that was good news on that front to keep producing more housing. Moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about market outlook, final piece of the podcast today. You know, markets have been sort of up and down. I think a lot of based off of kind of what we had talked about earlier, mainly on that inflation jobs data. We saw a bit of a decent pullback in the markets the last few weeks, but they've kind of rebounded lately with some of that positive economic news. Again, I think we're still anticipating some sort of pullback here.
Somewhat of a disconnect, I still feel, between what's happening out there and the markets and stuff. So it almost seems that the markets should be lower than they are, but it's not happening. A little bit of the good news. Again, those job performance numbers in normal times would be great news
Yeah.
and drive the markets up. Growth, growth, growth. But that's what's happening. But yet there is so much tension throughout the world here that it should be the opposite happening with the markets.
Mhm.
So we always talk about the potential of a recession, right?
Yes.
Is a recession coming? It seems that more and more analysts are pushing it forward. Like growth rates, anticipated growth rates are come down somewhat, but there's still no recession
Mhm.
built in. So whether that happens or not, and again, recession is just a word, it's just a technical, thing. We
Yeah.
go in and out of recession, and we don't really know that. But whether that happens in the new year is, we'll see.
Let's wrap up this podcast. Joe, financial planning tip of the month. Let's give it to the listeners and viewers here.
Yes, so here's your financial planning tip of the month. I think, if you look at sort of what's happening in the markets, and you're reading everything, you certainly feel that there's a lot of turmoil. There is a lot of turmoil out there in the world and stuff. And this week alone, I've had a number of clients call in and saying, I'm really worried about my investments, worried about my planning and stuff. So a tip I find is that you just need to kind of regroup and just sit down and kind of look at your planning. And if you're still long-term focused, I think then you have to satisfy yourself that through the long term, this will work out. There's always been something happening in the markets at all times. It's never been a point where the conditions throughout the world have been always sort of quiet, other than COVID, and that was an event in itself. So go back to the planning, talk to your financial planner, and just kind of sit down. If you're still focused on the long term, then stay the course on the long term and stuff. If you're more focused on the short term, there may be things that you need to do. Have that discussion with your financial planner and talk to them and discuss that. It's always good to have a meeting with them.
Keep your focus on the plan.
Exactly.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for watching, listening. If you haven't already subscribed, leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're watching, listening. Check us out. We'll be back. You'll want to see next month's tip of the month as well. So come back and we'll see you in the next podcast.